Thank you, Ted and John, and ladies and gentlemen, and the Abele family. I am really happy to be here today. I know the Commission's been looking forward to this for some time, and so have I. I am honored to be able to give the keynote speech today, because I knew Ralph, I worked with him, and I'll tell you some of the good things that need to be told here today. But before I do that, I have to say that I appreciate speaking in front of this particular flag. And the reason is, 20 years ago, I gave that same flag to my wife for her birthday. And I wanted to tell you, as a husband, I never made a better gift. I think it's a great day today for the Abele family, for the waterways of Pennsylvania, the environment of Pennsylvania, for the Fish Commission, and all of us who knew Ralph and worked with Ralph. So what I'd like to do is tell you two stories about Ralph. The first is my favorite personal story, and then I want to tell you the story of Ralph's impact on the environment of Pennsylvania. First, the personal story. Shortly after I left the Senate, I think it was 1982 or 83, I took one of my sons shad fishing on the Delaware. And I had a 14-foot boat that we trailed behind the car. We got over there and we were shad fishing. And we were about 20 yards from the New Jersey shore when we anchored. Nothing happened, so we thought we'd pull up the anchor and go to a different spot. I couldn't get the anchor free. What the heck do I do? I could cut it, but then we couldn't anchor anyplace else. So I was looking all around, and suddenly across the river towards the Pennsylvania side, I saw a Fish Commission boat, a green boat with a stripe down the side, and I waved at it. And it came towards me. And as I got closer, there was a guy standing up on the right side with a steel pot and a flak jacket. I said to my son, that's either George C. Scott or General Patton on a waterborne Jeep. Well, of course, 60 seconds later, it was Ralph Abele. He came up to my boat. He looked at me very seriously. He pulled out a knife, a big hunting knife, and handed it to me. He started to hand it to me, handle first, and said, here, cut yourself free. What's going on here? And he pulled it back and he laughed. And then 2 minutes later, he had my anchor freed, and we were able to go on. But the best thing happened 2 or 3 weeks later. I got a package in the mail from Ralph, about that big. And when I opened it, it was a large plastic replica of a shad, like the kind you see out here. And I have had that shad on my wall in my den ever since, and I'll have it there forever. But Ralph had that mischievous sense of humor of seeing me in a tough spot and making me sweat a little. But the second story I want to tell is the story, far more important, the story of Ralph's impact on the environment of Pennsylvania. Because Ralph was a unique environmental leader in developing Pennsylvania's environmental future. To appreciate Ralph's role, though, I want to take just a moment to look at the environmental history of Pennsylvania. Because without that, you don't really appreciate the impact of what happened. In the century after the Civil War, Pennsylvania's government was dominated by the coal industry, the steel industry, and the railroad industry. And they brazenly exploited our natural resources. Take the coal industry, for example. In 1905, the Shamokin and Pottsville Railroad Company gave a deed to Monroe Culp in Northumberland County for 95 acres. The borough of Culpmont is now built there. But in the deed, the coal company, the railroad company specifically, reserved to itself the right to discharge into the waters of Shamokin Creek the waste of its coal mines forever. That gives you some idea of the arrogance of the coal companies. That same year, 1905, the state passed its first clean streams law in response to disease caused by untreated sewage going into the waterways. The coal industry was completely exempted. In 1923, 1937, and 1945, there were other clean streams laws passed. And every single one of them had an exemption for the coal industry or very favorable treatment. In 1965, 100 years after the Civil War, the legislature finally brought the coal companies under the Clean Streams Law with the Act with Law 585. But by that time, the damage had been done. Pennsylvania went into the second third of the 20th century with more miles of acid mine drainage polluted streams, more acres of acid or mine drainage, mine scars, strip mine, abandoned land than any state in the country. The coal companies had taken the wealth from our land, transferred it elsewhere, and left it for us to clean up the mess. And Pennsylvania government wasn't really able or organized to do that job. We had the Department of Forests and Waters. You had the Department of Health, the Department of Mines and Mineral Industries. You had the Fish Commission. You had the Sanitary Water Board. You had others. Everyone had a piece of the environment, but there was no central commission, no central mission, no coordination. And so that's how we started the last third of the 20th century. But in that year, 1966, we began in Pennsylvania a revolution to undo that damage and build a new future. I was elected to the House in 1966 on a pledge of a new Clean Streams Law. Because of that, I had the honor of winding up in the very middle, the very center of the legislative efforts to undo the damage and pass new legislation for a new environmental future. John Ladanio was chairman of our committee. I became the secretary, and we passed a tremendous amount of legislation, which I'll get to in just a minute. But we recognized that we could not do this without staff help. You know how bad it was? When I came to the House, I didn't have an office. I didn't have a secretary. I didn't have a telephone. The only thing I had was my seat on the floor of the House. So we knew we had to have backup and support. And this is where Ralph Abele came to Harrisburg. In 1967, the legislature had enacted the Joint House-Senate Water and Air Pollution Control Committee for the purpose of providing the staff work and the backup, the research, the investigation we needed to deal with the kind of legislation that we were going to be passing. So at that point, in 1969, the legislature chose Ralph Abele to be the executive director of that committee. And it was a great choice. He was the right choice. Ralph filled the role with distinction. He brought to the position an exemplary fervor, enthusiasm, dedication, and a knowledge that made a truly significant contribution to the legislation that we passed between 1969 and 1972. Consider the following: a comprehensive Clean Streams Law, an All-Surface Mining Act, the Solid Waste Management Act, the Pennsylvania Scenic Rivers Act, the Department of Environmental Resources Act, the act requiring PennDOT to conduct environmental studies and planning highway projects, and of course, the environmental amendment to the state constitution, Article 1, Section 27. Taken together, these and other bills, other laws, provided the legal and constitutional framework we needed for a new environment here in Pennsylvania. But to make that happen, people had to make it happen. And that's when Ralph went to the Fish Commission in 1972 as its executive director. He did the same thing here at the Fish Commission he did for the Legislative Committee. He gave it a clear environmental mission, leadership, enthusiasm, and a relentless determination to eliminate water pollution. Ralph enthusiastically used broadened powers of the Fish Commission, along with the DER, to enforce the Clean Streams Law. He pursued violators vigorously. The DER had boots on the ground, but Ralph had boats in the water. And he used them to make the Fish Commission a formidable guardian of the waterways of Pennsylvania. Ralph also became one of the most zealous and dedicated champions of the environmental amendments of the state constitution. He believed it. He loved it. He did everything he could to advocate the principles of that amendment, that the people of Pennsylvania have a right to a clean environment, and that the state of Pennsylvania should serve as trustee for these natural resources for future generations. So Ralph promulgated that everywhere, on the Fish Commission magazine, in offices around the state, and wherever he went. Ralph also picked up the manner of restoring shad to the Susquehanna. As a House member, I had tried to force the power companies to install fish ladders in the 4 dams. But my effort was stymied by the fact that the Conowingo, which is the first dam, is in the state of Maryland. And therefore, the Pennsylvania legislature can't do anything about it. We have no jurisdiction. But Ralph found a way to get around that hurdle. He led an effort to get the Federal Power Commission to require the installation of fish ladders as a condition for renewal of their federal licenses. And as a result of these efforts, fish patches devices are now in the Conowingo and the other dams. At the Joint Legislative Committee and the Fish Commission, Ralph demonstrated another trait of effective leadership. He employed and mentored good people to help him. Ralph knew that in politics or government, you don't get anything accomplished alone or by yourself. You need a team. It's not golf, it's not tennis, it's football. And Ralph, therefore, hired and mentored such talented environmentalists as John Schellenberger, Pete Duncan, Larry Schweiger, and our own John Arway. That was the kind of team he put in the field to fight for the environmental cause. Governor Casey had a question he'd like to ask everybody who he met who had served in public office, appointed or elected. And the question is this: what did you do with the power of your office when you had it? Ralph Abele could answer that question very proudly. Look at the record. A great deal and a great deal more. Let us therefore dedicate the marker outside the building to the memory of Ralph Abele. His spirit, his commitment to the waterways of Pennsylvania and the environment of Pennsylvania are here forever, for all time. He will always be a hero of the environmental revolution. He gave it leadership when it counted in building a new environmental future for the great state of Pennsylvania. Ralph, thank you, and God bless you.